So after just a few moments, a few minutes actually, most of the bubbles are gone from my epoxy. I want to just talk for a moment about your position when you're actually applying this epoxy. You need to be comfortable and you need to be in the right frame of mind to take your time. Now, the way that I apply epoxy, if I have something I don't want to drip anything on, I'll put something underneath it. Now, I kind of lean down and I put my forearm on the table. That way my forearm is supported. I'm not out here trying to do things and making a great big mess. The only thing that moves are my fingers. And I just go like this and I distribute that epoxy onto that wrap. I do not want to get too much epoxy on the rod blank itself. I do want some, maybe 1/8 of an inch at the most. So you want to be pretty clean, and you want to put this epoxy on pretty sparingly as well. So make sure you got a good rest. Okay, make sure your arm is supported, and most importantly, be in the right frame of mind for taking your time here. Don't get in a hurry. This is really critical. If you screw this up, you'll be kicking yourself for quite some time. So let's go ahead and start the epoxying process. Okay, so I've got the rod turning in my rod turner right now, and I'm going to start applying epoxy. Now the key here is don't put too much epoxy on there. Okay, for instance, all I have on is just very, very tiny drip. And I'm going to start brushing it on, just really lightly and delicately. There are some bubbles in there, not a big deal. Just concentrate on coating, getting those threads just wet with epoxy. Just put a little bit on there. And keep your eye out for, exposed threads that you haven't gotten quite yet. Now my arm is supported, so the only thing that has to move here is, my fingers. Okay, so I've got a pretty good amount of epoxy on there at this point. I've got enough on there to cover all those threads. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of I'm going to get my eyes above the rod tip, the rod here, looking down at the tip. Now you can't really see what I'm seeing here, but essentially the surface tension of this epoxy. There's a connection of epoxy, a little pillow of epoxy in between the rod and the actual thread here. And I'm very carefully going to just run that out onto the blank and get just about 1/8 of an inch of epoxy onto that blank, and holding my hand really still, let it do that, okay? And then come over to the other side and make sure that I'm doing the other side just as well. Holding it, then moving slowly to the side and getting about 1/8 of an inch of epoxy onto the blank. It's going to lock it into place really, really well. Okay, so I'm going to move over and do the other one now. I need to work relatively quickly here because as I was setting up the camera and everything, this epoxy was starting to harden up. Now I've got too much epoxy on here now, so I'm going to wipe some epoxy off of this brush. I'm going to start coming up here and just distributing it and wiping it off as I'm doing it. I'm taking off a lot of excess epoxy right now. Key is, don't put too much on. Some people make the mistake of thinking, okay, well, they've got too much on, and they think, okay, well, the rod turner will take care of it, during the turning process, and it'll all be even. Big mistake. If you have too much on here, even if it's turning constantly, you're going to end up with a ripply, wavy finish. Okay, so don't get too much on here. Alright, so now I'm going to just touch that brush to the wrap. I'm going to move over slightly to the side and get about 1/8 of an inch of epoxy onto the blank, just locking that into place. It's going to be a nice sturdy wrap. Don't make the mistake of running epoxy, onto the blank too much. Make sure you're well supported and make sure that you let the turner do the work for you here. I'm just holding it very, very still. Okay. Get just a little bit more excess off there. Okay, so now what I need to do is, I do have some bubbles in that finish, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the torch, and I'm not going to point the torch at the wrap. I'm going to do it kind of to the side. All I want to do is superheat the air around these wraps, okay? And that's going to get rid of bubbles. A lot of folks will just use an alcohol burner. I like to use this because it's a push button affair and allows me to very surgically heat that air up and get rid of bubbles that may still be in there even after you've, there we go, even after you've gotten most of the bubbles out just through the brushing process. Okay, so now there is some glare on this because of the lighting that I have right now. It may not look that good on camera, but in person it looks beautiful. This is really looking good from my perspective. So that's how you apply the epoxy. The key there is just take your time, make very, very small movements and adjustments there. And then just let this turn. Come back and view your work. If you feel like another coat is necessary, by all means, put another coat of epoxy on there. But and in fact, I think that's what I am going to do here. This is just a little bit too thin. I like just a little bit more of a hump there of epoxy. I like the epoxy to be just a little more thick. So, just to recap, make sure that your hand is well supported, and all you have to do is just make very, very slow, precise movements with the brush. Okay? That's all you have to do. Above all, take your time, get rid of the bubbles, go slow, and you'll end up with really nice looking wraps.